Go to our screen share. And welcome and good morning. Welcome to our Sunday school class, where we are going through the age of the patriarchs. We are now in the lifetime of Isaac. So before we get to Genesis 21, picking up where we had left off, let's go back and refresh Genesis 15, verse 13. A prophecy the Lord gave to Abraham. Genesis 15. So as you're finding your way there, quick refresher, we are now in the year 1846 BC. We are in the Middle Bronze Age. China still being ruled by Emperor Bujang of the Xia Dynasty, their first dynasty. Egypt is still in that first intermediate period after the old period. Old Kingdom has come and gone. The pyramids there in Egypt have been sitting there for a couple hundred years now in Giza. So we've got two different kingdoms ruling in two different places. Over in the city of Heracleopolis, we have Pharaoh Kheti IV ruling the 10th dynasty. He is the Pharaoh that Abraham interacts with. And further down south in the city of Thebes, we have the 11th dynasty of pharaohs being ruled by Pharaoh Montuhotep II. All of the Bible lands of Shinar, Sumer, Mesopotamia, and across that is all being ruled by the city of through the Emperor Shulgi. Here in 1846 BC, Abraham is 105 years old now. Sarah is 95, Ishmael is 19, Isaac is a 5-year-old, and we are picking up with a promise about this time, actually a prophecy that the Lord had given Abraham, Genesis 15, verse 13. God said to Abraham, "Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. This is also quoted in Acts chapter 7, verse 6 by Stephen in his message, where he reminds folks in Acts chapter 7, verse 6. Here we are. Stephen reminds them, but God spoke to this effect, that his descendants would be aliens in a foreign land. They would be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. Now, as we saw the video at the end of last week, neither of these verses mention the word Egypt. This is actually referring to the time frame where we're going to pick up with Isaac being 5 years old. From the time Isaac is 5 years old and what happens then to the time of the Exodus is exactly 400 years. And they are going to be either mistreated or even enslaved. They're enslaved for more than 80 years, less than 164 years. So yeah, so that's the promise here. So let's take a look at this now with that background in Genesis 21, picking up in verse 8. And we will now see the events that the Lord foretold, where this mistreatment is going to start while they're in the land of Canaan, which is a land not theirs. So Genesis 21, verse 8. The child, Isaac, grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Sarah, the son of Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, mocking. Therefore she said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the lad and your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her, for through Isaac your descendant shall be named. And of the son of the maid I will make a nation also, because he is your descendant. So on the day Isaac is weaned at 5 years old, Ishmael mocks him. Again, Ishmael is 19, Isaac's 5. So there's rub between the lines here, Hagar and Ishmael, Sarah and Isaac. And Sarah recognizes it for what it is and says, this ain't going to work. They got to go. And this bothers Abraham because that's his son. And so the Lord comforts Abraham and says, yes, Sarah's right this time. So listen to Sarah, but I will bless this child. And he'll be okay. But this needs to happen. So very tough time. These are kind of the things that happen when we have consequences of decisions that we make in our flesh And then they create choices that we wouldn't be forced to make otherwise. But keep in mind, every life is a gift from God. Ishmael is not, while the circumstance was not good, Ishmael is not an accident. Ishmael is not a mistake. The circumstances were that they could have tried all they wanted, even with Hagar, and God would not have allowed or blessed life. So life comes from God. Ishmael's life came from God. And so God had a plan for Ishmael, which he may or may not have always followed as we look at his biography. But the point is, we always find ourselves in the best situation when we follow God first. And he's so gracious, as we certainly saw with Manasseh's example, he's so gracious to bring us back around to his path. But sometimes because of choices we make in the past, it forces us to make harder decisions in the present. But the right thing to always do is to choose the option that draws us closer to God, even if it comes at a cost and sacrifice, and we trust God to take care of the rest. So that kind of makes sense for everyone. We see the situation here. This is described, you can hold your place in Genesis 21 if you like. This is described by the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Galatians. Let's go to chapter 4 of Galatians. We looked at some of the previous verses, but now we're going to pick up where we left off with Paul in this book. Galatians chapter 4, we'll look at the end of the chapter. Galatians chapter 4, we'll pick up in verse 28. Verse 28 of Galatians 4, Paul tells the church here in this Gentile region, but they've got a little bit of a mix. Galatians 4:28, and you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time, he who was born according to the flesh persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now also. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of a bondwoman, but of the free woman. So what's the connection Paul is making for New Testament churches today in the church age that we are in and that they were in it for the churches in Galatia? He mentioned earlier that the Jewish law, the Jerusalem of the time that Paul was writing, had found itself in bondage. Even though they were the Lord's people, they found themselves in bondage to the letter of the law, and that had become even an idol and a stumbling block for them, where he was saying that through Christ, the Son, we have freedom and liberty from these things. These things were meant to be a blessing, not a burden. As Christ said, the Sabbath was made for man. Man was not made for the Sabbath. And so if we understand the work of Christ and what he has done for us, then we are to be in a position of freedom and not a position of bondage. And anytime church becomes, and we should know the difference in our spirit and in our heart when church is becoming a burden versus a joyful, willing sacrifice, voluntary sacrifice. There are things we freely give up, and sometimes it hurts, but it's always worth it. There are things we give up to serve God, but we do it joyfully and willingly. When church is becoming a drudgery, it's becoming a burden and a hassle for us, something's wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be. And when we feel like we are small and the law of the church is big and dominating, we got something wrong, brethren. We got to fix that, because that is not how God intended. That is not scriptural. The life he has for us to live is beautiful and freeing. It's still reverent and in line with him and in obedience to him, but in a joyful, freeing way. And so that was missed in the early days of the church, when as Gentiles are coming in, they're thinking, okay, we're a Jewish messianic church. What are we going to do with these Gentiles? Do they need to be Jews to become Christians first? For Jews first to become Christians? And so they're trying to figure all that out in these early days. And that's why Paul was writing to the Galatians, because he was afraid for them, because they started to fall back into the Jewish legalism, missing the whole freedom they had being a church under God. Does that kind of make sense, Brother Clay?
Okay, you're verse 30.
Yeah.
Cast out the bondwoman and the son, for the son of the bondwoman not be an heir with the son of the free woman. We are not children of the bond. He said to that son would have and build a nation. So
Yes,
what does that on Ishmael?
Ishmael.
Okay, of his seed,
Mhm.
are they? They're not of the. They were the bond.
Mhm.
So what did that put? Where did that put there?
Well, that put them, quick answer. There are two applications. There's the individual and there's the group. The group is kind of a general thing. There's always freedom for an individual to break out from the group thing. Ruth is a great example of breaking out from the general of the Moabites. Generally speaking, they were separated and they became their own. The Arab nations basically came through Ishmael, and the Arab nations claim Ishmael. Even more so, the Muslim religion is Islam. Muhammad claimed a direct descendant through Ishmael. I believe he claimed to be of his son Kedar. And so there was an allowance because of Abraham, through Abraham, that there would be an overpouring of blessing for them, but it would not be the same as what was done from God through the promise of Isaac. And individuals are welcome to come over and, to use the word, convert, and come over like Ruth converted. She told her mother-in-law, your God will be my God, your people, my people. And so if we are, no matter what our judgment and circumstance, we're always given the opportunity to come over to God. But these people, this group made up of individuals, was in this position of being blessed by God, but not being part of the promise that was made through Isaac. Does that help?
Yeah, and you said the Muslim.
Yep.
Why would we make a choice to be on that side?
The word Islam means submission. The word Islam means submission. Submission. Yeah, like being a boss of service. And so the way that the Islamic religion is presented is this is our submission to God. This is how we serve him. The Quran, now keep in mind, Muhammad was in the 600s AD, so 6 centuries after Jesus. And so the Quran is, according to them, it is the third testament. And it supposedly fixes all the human mistakes that became of the corrupted versions of the first and second testaments. So it's the third and complete covenant and testament, fixing all that. And Jesus was a good guy, but not all that. There's but one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. And so they follow Abraham. They have a lot of similarities with some of this stuff, but it definitely branches off into a different theology. And so, but again, the Lord from Abraham to Noah, from Adam to Noah to Abraham, these 20 generations on down, the Lord has always had a faithful remnant. Have they always been at 100% faithful in their performance? No, neither are we. But the Lord always has a people who are intended to be. Example, Abraham was to be a lighthouse to the Gentiles. And so whether you're Ruth and Moab, whether you're one of the Ishmaelites, there's always opportunity to come be part of what the Lord has made available as an individual. But group dynamics, groups are separated, and then individuals can choose to be a part of those different groups. So that's what Paul was referring to in Galatians 4, talking about the going away of Hagar and Ishmael that was a result of the start of the 400 years of persecution, which began with Ishmael at 19 years old, persecuting Isaac at 5 years old, exactly 400 years before the Exodus. So that's what happened there. Paul also talks about this not just in Galatians, but in Romans chapter 9. So if we go back to the left a little bit, Romans chapter 9. Oops, Acts too far. It's Romans, here we are. Let's pick up in verse 6. Romans 9, verse 6, Paul writes to this church, but it is not as though the word of God has failed, for they are not all Israel who are descended from Israel, nor are they all children because they are Abraham's descendants. But quoting what we just read in Genesis 21, through Isaac, your descendants will be named. That is not the children of the flesh. That is, it is not the children of the flesh who are children of God, but the children of the promise who are regarded as descendants. For this is the word of promise. At this time I will come, and Sarah shall have a son. So God absolutely has an established line of promise that he has created, and not everyone is born into that. Not everyone starts out as part of that, but the opportunity is there for anyone to come be a part of it. In fact, Jesus even tells the Jews of his day during his earthly ministry, you who are sons of the kingdom, who are in this position, you're going to find yourselves cast out, and you're going to find tax collectors and prostitutes coming in your place, because they're willing to convert and come to these things where you prided yourself on your position and therefore disqualified yourself from your position. The church can be guilty of that too, but we can also be blessed and restored, even as Manasseh was blessed and restored after all his crimes against God. So ultimately, it comes down to God establishes and determines what's acceptable or not. We choose if we are going to submit to God. If we want to talk about submission, there's the submission. We choose to recognize this is what God has. I want to be where God is. Just like Ruth. Your God's going to be my God, your people, my people. Sister Diane.
By offering Hagar in the first place, and then God did bless Hagar with Abraham.
Right.
So God had a love for Ishmael.
Yep.
He didn't want to get rid of him. He had Abraham's blood in him.
Right.
He honored that, even though it wasn't done right.
Amen.
Because it wasn't done right, he had to separate him.
Amen. Consequence. Amen. Very well said. Very well said. And that applies to our lives today. So one more verse on this event, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 18. Hebrews 11:18 tells us, it was he to whom it was said, in Isaac your descendants shall be called. So there's the establishment of God. So now Hagar and Ishmael are being cast out. And that's where we will pick up again in Genesis 21. So let's go here. So again, as always, the Bible is our foundation and ultimate authority. We are getting some background details from Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology and timelines and backgrounds and whatnot. So we are going to go to, let's see, right here. I'm going to back it up a little bit. So there's that line we were talking about with Jerusalem corresponding to Mount Sinai, and the talk about the example of bondage versus free there. But we are going to see Hagar and Ishmael first and foremost over here. Tell Beersheba. Let's see, so let me zoom out a little bit because Abraham was over here in Gerar. So now they're making their way away, going to the east. So they're making their way on down here. So let's read. Genesis 21, morning, Brother Joe. Genesis 21, 14 to 21. Genesis 21, 14. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, gave her the boy, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. So again, Abraham was in Gerar, sends them off towards the east. So here they are in Beersheba, right? This area here, just outside where the modern city is. So here's what stands there today. Four-horned altar. As we can see, still fairly barren. Hey, after Mercer Caverns, you can do anything. Yeah. Yeah, right. So after Mercer Cavern, you don't have to do anything anymore. You've done that. You don't need to see anything else.
Not gonna do it again.
You know, they say what goes up must come down. I look at this and I can say, what goes down has to come back up. Yeah. So that is ancient Tel means mount. So there's the ancient mount of old Beersheba here. So what happens here? Remember, Ishmael is 19 years old at this time. It's 1846 BC. So verse 15, when the water in the skin was used up, she left the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him about a bow shot away, for she said, do not let me see the boy die. And she sat opposite him, lifted up her voice, and wept. God heard the lad crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter with you, Hagar? Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad a drink. God was with the lad, and he grew, and he lived in the wilderness and became an archer. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Two quick thoughts on Paran. One, let's see, go to Paran. Up here. Oops, it switched us to the wrong thing. We're not doing that one. We are doing, my apologies. Sometimes when you pick something that's part of another thing, it takes you to another thing. We want that one. Yes. And we want to go up to there. There we are. So here is one place that's called Paran. You can see there's again Gezer and Beersheba. So making their way further down. Again, not a whole lot to see here. So, but while we're looking at this, what do you think of this interaction between between Hagar and the Lord? Here she is, she's expecting her son to die. So she's crying, looking that they're running out of water and they're going to die. And then God speaks to her and says, I've got you. He opens her eyes. She sees the water. They're able to refresh and they're able to continue on their journey. So even someone like Hagar, Egyptian slave, handmaid, someone like Ishmael, who was a child who was born out of human circumstance and not, even though he's firstborn, he's not the child of promise. He's not the one, quote unquote, wanted in this circumstance. They are not out of the sight of God. They matter to him. And he faithfully provided for them. So I appreciate that and find it very significant. So here's one thought of the one place called Paran. There's actually another. A bit further south. Further down in Saudi Arabia. And what's significant about this is right here we have the city of Medina. Right here we have the city of Mecca. Those are the two holiest cities in the religion of Islam. So again, with Muhammad in the 6th century, 600 years after Jesus, Muhammad claiming descent from Ishmael's son Keter, establishing the Islamic religion, that's the area we're talking about. They make their pilgrimage to Mecca to.
So is this like, I mean, I hate to use the term if it's an incorrect term, but if what happened to Ishmael and everything following, is it like stolen valor? Do they feel that they were the promised son?
Spoiler alert, In the Quran, Abraham does not offer Isaac, he offers Ishmael.
Oh, so they changed it.
In their words, they corrected it.
Interesting.
The Quran is the third testament correcting the human errors in the first and second.
Okay, yeah, and I don't mean to insult.
No,
ignorance with
it's
that
awareness.
term,
Yeah.
but
What
that
is, we
was
want to
what-
understand the
that's
mindset.
what kinda came
Yeah.
to mind.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, they both want the right, so yeah,
Mhm.
so they want him to do the first and then.
Keep in mind too, back in the day, and even more recently than should be the case, there's this thing called regicide, where any threat to the royal inheritance is killed. If you might be competing, someone who might try to compete for the crown, well, we'll just wipe you out. If you are related to the former king, we'll just wipe you out so you don't try to claim that family connection as a cause for you to be the rightful ruler. So something else happens a little as we go on here with Beersheba. And we've actually talked about this on Wednesday nights. This will relate to the Jubilees and World War I. So let's continue in Genesis 21. Let's pick up in verse 22. Now it came about at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, spoke to Abraham, saying, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my offspring or with my posterity, but according to the kindness that I have shown to you, you shall show to me and to the land in which you have sojourned. Abraham said, I swear it. But Abraham complained to Abimelech because of the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. And Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this thing. You did not tell me, nor did I hear of it until today. Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Then Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. Abimelech said to Abraham, what do these 7 ewe lambs mean, which you have set by themselves? He said, you shall take these 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that it may be a witness to me that I dug this well. Therefore, he called that place Beersheba, because there the two of them took an oath. So they made a covenant at Beersheba, and Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, arose and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the land of the Philistines for many days. So as we see, the strife is still continuing in the land not theirs. So we are continuing in these 400 years before the Exodus. So back to Beersheba. Pull this up here. Zoom in here. Not only do we have the ancient mound of the ancient site, we actually have what's reported to be Abraham's well. Of course, things have been built up around it. Map of the travels of Abraham. There she blows, according to some. Again, I can't tell you 100% yay or nay myself. It very well could be, it could not be. Yes, that's a fake beard. You can see the string right there. So we have reenactments, yes. We're not the only folks who do reenactments here. So yeah, so that's that. But what did this have to do with our Wednesday night studies? Oh, and it switched over to the other thing again. It switched over to our Wednesday night thing. So let me back out of here. Beersheba, as we see here, was the first place where Abraham's inheritance from God was validated by an outside authority, by Abimelech of the Philistines, leader of the area. And that was a title, so was Phicol. Others would later carry that same title. And so let's see, let's do that here. And that was significant because in World War I, 1917, the Jubilee, that was when British General Edmund Allaby, with a Jewish legion of John Henry Patterson serving under him, they went and he changed the strategy that the former guy was using. He kept trying to go into Gaza. He said, no, Beersheba. They went in Beersheba and they were able to restore Beersheba. And that was the first place that the Jews had their land again in the original land. And so just as Beersheba was the first place that was confirmed as theirs to Abraham thousands of years ago, it's the first place the Jews are restored to in World War I, as far as the land coming back to them. So God is very faithful, and as things are moved out, the reversal, things are moved back in. So there's part of that beautiful consistency of God here in that. The word Beersheba, Beer means well. Sheba means oath. In languages, B and V are often interchangeable. So Sheba, it's Sabbath, it's the day of oath. It's the number 7. And so it's the well of promise, the well of the oath they made here. And so it becomes a very, very significant thing. So any other thoughts, comments, questions on the event of Abraham here and the possession of the well of promise, the well of the oath? In other news of the time, we have the birth of Rebecca, which takes us to the family tree once again to try to keep all this straight. So Terah's family tree, we're told in Genesis 22:23, Bethuel became the father of Rebecca. So here's Abraham's dad, Terah. His daughter is Sarah, his son Abraham, their half-brother and sister, they get married. Abraham has 2 brothers, Nahor and Haran. Haran's the father of Lot. Haran dies, so Abraham takes in his nephew Lot. Other brother Nahor marries his brother Haran's daughter Milcah, his niece. And so they have Bethuel, and Bethuel becomes the father of Laban. Laban becomes the father of Rebecca and Bethuel is the father of Rebecca and Laban. Laban and Rebecca are siblings. So we are at the point here where Rebecca is born to Bethuel, while Abraham through Hagar's had Ishmael, who then proceeds to have the Ishmaelites. Isaac will later be married to Rebecca a little later on. So Rebecca is the daughter of Isaac's cousin Bethuel. Clear as mud, right? Yeah. So Abraham and Nahor are brothers. So Isaac and Bethuel are first cousins. Rebecca is the daughter of Isaac's first cousin Bethuel through his uncle Nahor, Abraham's brother. All good? Okay. Well, moving on in time, this now brings us to the year 1835. Oh, I'm sorry, in 1837, we have a new ruler of the 10th dynasty in Egypt. His name is, I don't know, it's lost. But we know he was there, so he's on the king list. And so 1837, replacing, I'm sorry, I've been saying Keti IV, it was his son, Merykare, who's been ruling. And so we got a new guy after him. But anyway, in other news, 2 years later, 1835 is a pretty significant year. Abraham's now 116, Sarah's 106, Ishmael is 30, Isaac is 16. What happens in 1835? Well, I've been mentioning, let's go back to Google Earth here. I've been mentioning that out of the city of Shulgi has been ruling the whole lands of Mesopotamia. Well, here's what happens with Shulgi. Zoom out here. So there's that whole Persian Gulf and all of that stuff. There we are. Tower of Babel right there. So there's all that. And here's Abraham and everyone over here. So Shulgi's ruling over all this. Well, what happens in 1835? There was a lot of unrest in the land. This is, taken from David Roll here. A lot of unrest in the land because there's been famine. Well, Abraham certainly dealt with that. So one of the sons of Shulgi saw his opportunity to grab the reins of power while people are blaming his dad, the king, for bringing the wrath of the gods upon them. So the scheming prince has his father Shulgi murdered while the old king is praying at the tomb of the dynasty founder, Ur-Nammu. But another son, Amar-Sin, quickly puts an end to his sibling. And then he himself seizes the throne. This bloody palace coup is recorded in a lunar eclipse omen. Here's the quote we have from the ancient records of the time. The omen is given for Ur and its king. The king of Ur will experience famine. There will be many deaths. The king of Ur will be wronged by his son. Shamash, the sun god, associated with Ham, son of Noah. Shamash, the sun god, will catch him. The king will die in the place of his father's mourning. The king's son, who was not named for the kingship, will seize the throne. Through this process called astronomical retrocalculation, we know how fast the Earth's orbiting the sun and the moon orbiting the Earth and all that stuff. So we can run it backwards and go back in time to see when these things happen. It fits. The lunar eclipse happened on July 31st of 1835 BC. That when they predicted this. So the end of the reign of King Shulgi of Ur was foretold by this lunar eclipse omen. This is exactly the last year of Shulgi that was calculated. So the whole dynasty of his line of Ur 3 ends in 1793 BC. We know that Shulgi ruled for 43 years. We know that from the end of the dynasty, going back to the death of Shulgi, there's 43 years remaining. So when we go 1793 back to the 43 years, it takes us right back to 1835 BC. It fits exactly. So the astronomical retrocalculation and the calculation of these years, it all fits perfectly together. This is when that happened. So we're able to confirm these ancient written records. So we've got a new king in the land of Ur, ruling out of the city of Ur, and his name is Amar-Sin. Sin is the moon god. He's known for being a fairly good king. He tried to rebuild the ancient sites. He tried to work on rebuilding what was there at the Tower of Babel, kind of restoring that. But funny thing, over there at Eridu, that work was abandoned during his time. Salt, too much salinity. They made all the agricultural pursuits unprofitable. They were not able to make it work. So the Tower of Babel area had to still remain abandoned as it is to this day. Imagine that. It was foretold that he would die from goring by an ox, but he died from a scorpion bite on the shoe. So that is Amar-Sin, king of Ur, ruler of the lands of Mesopotamia. In 1831 BC, we have a new ruler in China. Jiang becomes the new emperor of the Xia dynasty. In other news, in 1830, the Middle Kingdom in Egypt begins. Pharaoh Montuhotep II of that 11th dynasty in Thebes, he reunites Egypt. And now this new kingdom age, the Middle Kingdom it's referred to, they still build pyramids, but nothing like the ones before. They're a lot smaller, a little more practical, less demanding in construction. The focus in the Middle Kingdom is a lot more on literature and art. Life-size sculptures are what they're doing. So what happened with Ishmael? We're told a little bit. Let's go to Genesis 25. In Genesis 25, we'll pick up in verse 12. Genesis 25, verse 12. Now these are the records of the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's maid, bore to Abraham. And these are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names, in order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, and Abdeel, and Mibsam, and Mishma, and Duma, and Massa, Hadad, and Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedema. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their camps, 12 princes according to their tribes. And that also happens to be recorded in 1 Chronicles chapter 1. Oops, we flip over here. 1 Chronicles chapter 1, picking up in verse 29. These are their genealogies. The firstborn of Ishmael was Nabath, and Kedar, Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jatur, Naphish, and Kedema. These were the sons of Ishmael. So just as Jacob would become Israel and his sons would be the 12 tribes of Israel, so we have the 12 tribes of Ishmael. Ishmael is recognized in Arabian folklore as the founder of the Arab nations. So there we have that split off and all that happening over there. In 1825 BC, we have a new king of Ur replacing Amar-Sin. His name is Shu-Sin, succeeding his brother Amar-Sin. There was an open revolt of his Amorite subjects. So he built a wall between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers in his 4th year to hold off the outside Amorites from attacking. And this brings us to a good stopping point, because where we will be picking up next week is Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac. So feel free to look ahead in Genesis 22 there. But for now, any other comments, observations, or questions on this little snapshot of events in the life of Abraham and Isaac, and the Lord moving things forward with his plan for his people? Now, we will call it good for now. We'll go ahead and stop the share, stop our recording, and get ready for our song service.